I don't know about in your community, but in my community, when a suitor comes to the house and inquires about the hand of a daughter in marriage and presents himself before a father and mother, a father looks at the young man with his eyebrow raised. Sure, I'm glad we don't go through that today. And in my community, he said, all right, young man, but who your peoples is? Who are your people? That is a question that is asked that seeks to discern if the young man in question has had proper home training, testing, 1, 2, 3, has proper etiquette, proper values. In other words, will this young man be able to provide for our daughter in the way in which we have helped her to become accustomed? Do you have the proper background? Where's your people? Where'd they go to school? Where they been? Where they live? It's all a question of whose people you are. Who are your people and whose people are we? Is the question that our text raises for us on this week. We continue with our sermon series of Outsiders and Outcasts, written by a preacher by the name of Tom First, who is a pastor in Memphis, Tennessee. He has had us, as we approach Advent, take a look at the Advent text in a new way, particularly the genealogy that is held in the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. And he points out to us that there are about 5 strange occurrences in that genealogy. And we've talked about 2 of the women. Today we talk about the 3rd. We talk about Ruth. Now, Ruth is a story that's not well known to many because it's not a part of the regular lectionary calendar of readings. But it is an important story, and there's something in there for each of us and all of us to glean. Of course, I know that being biblical scholars, all of you know the story of Ruth. They don't know the story. The story of Ruth goes like this. In the time when the judges ruled Israel, a certain man, Elimelech, and his wife, Naomi, and their 2 sons lived in Bethlehem in Judah. That's okay. Leave it there. We'll pick it up later. And you all will know that Judah and Bethlehem being translated means house of bread. And in the house of bread, we are told in this story, there's a famine in the land. Imagine that. In the house of bread, there ain't no bread. And so it is Elimelech, whose name means God is king, and his wife Naomi, whose name means pleasantness or sweetness, and their 2 sons leave the land of promise. How many of you know they're living in the promised land? And high-tack themselves to the land of Moab. Now, ordinarily, that would be no big thing, because if you're hungry, you go someplace to find something to eat. But they happen to go to the land of Moab. What is wrong with Moab? Glad you asked me. It seems as though the people of Moab are disliked by the people of Judah. Why is that? Because their history is suspect. Their people are questionable. What people are those? Well, glad you asked again. This people is descended from an incestuous relationship that was had between Noah and one of his daughters. We gave it. This is As the World Turns, part 2. And the other daughter had a daughter by her father, and those became the Ammonites. And we don't like the Moabites, and we don't like the Ammonites. Yeah, yicky, poo, cooties, nah. And we would have nothing to do with them. But isn't it strange that when I ain't got nothing, isn't it strange that when I'm hungry, I will go find food from whomever I can get it? And isn't it strange that people that we might dislike or never associate with, if there's a disaster or a catastrophe, we don't care who we get help from. So sometimes outsiders become insiders. But let us continue. And so it was that they go to the land of Moab, where they find food aplenty in a place that they supposedly despise. But as they get there, calamity strikes again. Because when they get there, and after they've been there about a New York minute, Elimelech dies. And so now Naomi is without husband. And let me reiterate for about the 147th time that in biblical times, women were the property of their husbands. I sure am glad that don't happen no more. And so it was, she is now without covering. She is now without ownership. Now she is a vulnerable woman at risk. But she's okay in this regard. She's still got two sons. She's got Mahlon and she's got Chilion. But as we look at those two names, we know that something strange is about to happen. Because Mahlon in the Hebrew means disease. So we know that he ain't too long for this earth. I mean, he already, now why somebody mama names them disease, I don't know. Well, Chilion, that name translated in the Hebrew means perish. So, stay with me here. Elimelech and Naomi, by God is king and pleasant and sweetness, have two children that they named disease and perish. This story is going to a bad place. And so it is, after Elimelech dies, they remain in Moab for 10 years, and the two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, take Moabite wives. But after 10 years, both of them die. And so now Naomi ain't got no husband. Orpah ain't got no husband. And Ruth ain't got no husband. Three women at risk in a bad place. But as it turns, Naomi hears from home. They sent her a text. And that text says, "You are welcome back home. We have food." And then they put a smiley face. And so Naomi, hearing that the Lord has considered his people and has provided food for the people back in Judah, takes up stakes, turns east, and starts heading back home, accompanied by Orpah and accompanied by Ruth. And as they're going, she stops and says, "Now, it's going to be such a much for me to make my way in this world. And now I got two other folks I got to consider. And the people back home don't really care for Moabites. So let me do this. Girls, come here." And they had to cry. Said, "Go back." No, come with me. Come with me. Here we go. He said, "Girls, come here. I want you to go back to your mama house. And may it be well with you. And thank you for treating me kind." Now, hold on one second. Parenthetically, isn't it strange, since women are the property of the husband, that she says, "Go back to your..." You're paying attention. This is good. So go back to your mother's house that it may be well with you. And thank you for treating with me. And so Orpah says, "Okay, peace." So Orpah goes back home. But Ruth says, "Never, never will I leave thee. I will stay with thee always. And your people will become my people. And your God will be my God." Isn't that right? Okay, good. Thank you so much. And they go the way to Jerusalem. And when they get there, something strange starts happening. The people of the town surround her and they say, "Isn't this Naomi? Isn't this the woman who lost her husband? Isn't this the woman who lost? Let's gather together and cry." And Naomi says, "Nay, nay, don't cry for me, because the Lord has done this to me. I want y'all to get angry with me. I want y'all to fuss at God with me, because I am angry, 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 angry with God." Now, those who study this text bring some new and added perspectives to it. For it is thought that the reader has an opportunity to identify with persons in this story. And 8 times out of 10, people identify with Ruth. Why is that? Because Ruth, despite being a Moabite, is kind and compassionate and considerate and faithful and open to the leading of God. And so everybody wants to be like Ruth. It's kind of like when Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan. You have read that one, right? Okay, Jesus tells this story about a man gets beat up about his head and shoulders and left for dead. And then one of the pastors from John Calvin Presbyterian passed by and didn't do nothing for him. And then one of the ministers from United Baptist passed by and didn't do nothing for him. And then a member of Annandale Methodist came, a Samaritan, another outcast, another hated person, another person whom would not consider you because of the enmity that has occurred between these people for so long, stopped and bound up his wounds and took him to a place where he could be cared for. It's like that. And so it is that we are to learn a lesson from that and identify with something. And Jesus asked the question, well, who then is the neighbor? And they said, the one who stopped and cared for him. But another scholar says, stop for a minute and think about who you're identifying with. We identify with Ruth because Ruth is the person that we would like to be. Ruth is the person that we ought to be like. But the scholar offers to us this thought, that maybe we ought to identify with Naomi. Because Naomi, despite the fact that she's a God-fearing woman, is bitter as all get out, angry as all get out, because stuff has not gone her way. I don't know if that is happening in this day and age. I don't know if people are angry because they think life has not gone their way. I don't know if people think that they're owed something for getting up in the morning. I don't. Could it be that people, despite the fact that they are Christian, sometimes do not act in Christian ways? I'm not talking about here. I'm talking about other churches necessarily. I don't know if sometimes people who ain't even Christian sometimes act more Christian than we do. And why is she so angry? Because God did this to me. Well, maybe we ought to stop, Naomi, and think about why we're in the shape we're in. Because sometimes it ain't God. Sometimes it's stuff we do to our own self. Sometimes it's the sinfulness we have carried with us. Sometimes it's stuff that we have done to other folks that ain't too kind. Maybe the accumulation of all of the years of loving God when it's convenient and not when it's not may have had some deleterious effects. I use that word because I went to school. I looked it up too. I mean bad stuff. And so it is that as the story goes on, Ruth and Naomi go back home, and Ruth, at the end of the day, becomes redemption for Naomi. How is that? Well, traditionally, that redemption means the return or restoration of property or money or something of that nature. But I think as we read this story, something deeper happens. That in this story, Ruth's faithfulness becomes the redemptive force that reshapes Naomi's universe. And that Naomi, who is supposed to be representing Israel in the story, now becomes the recipient of redemption or restoration of relationship with God and everybody else. And then we find out that some 12 generations later, she becomes the great-great-great-great-great-great-grandma of this little fella who was born in Bethlehem. They rested him in this manger. He was an outsider too, I always say if Jesus were to come now, he'd be born in a Budweiser crate behind the ABC store. Amen. And we would miss him. But those 12 generations later, he became the redemption for all of creation. And so we ask ourselves the question today, whose people are we? Are we Naomi's people? Are we Ruth's people? Are we Jesus' people? Time will tell.
Our closing hymn this morning is hymn